Good morning, everyone, and thanks so much for having me again as your featured keynote. Jeffrey and I go way back, and I think so much about him and his efforts to make the world a better place, and all of the work that Ride Amigos has done over the years. I also wanted to, before I start, just wish everyone well. This is a super unprecedented time for us, and in transportation, I think a lot of us are scratching our heads wondering how the COVID-19 pandemic is going to pan out for those of us in the transportation demand management field, public transit, and all of the transportation related industries like aviation, even the touristic industry of transportation, the cruise ships. And so what I wanted to tell you is that when I put this talk together for Jeffrey and his team, it was not a COVID-19 era. So I have added some remarks about that, but I'm not going to speak extensively as I go through some of the research here today. So just learning how to operate this. So this talk is really featured on the science of commuting, and really what I want to do today with you is to talk about pooling and telecommuting. And what I think is important for us to talk about is first the societal value of these modes, and in particular carpooling. I think many of you know I've been frustrated to see the numbers of carpooling going down, not upward, and I think we need to really think through this. And I know that Jeffrey's company and a number of the sponsoring entities of the event are thinking a lot about this. I also want to talk to you about incentives and disincentives and what we know from the research about what works and doesn't work, along with the notions of gamification, how we can use gaming, and some companies are working very hard on that now to see how that dimension could inspire people to do more of these behaviors. Before I wrap up, I want to talk about the challenges to the research process, why this can be really challenging for us to research. And then also, I'm going to conclude with emerging questions in light of COVID-19. So market trends are indeed changing, which shouldn't surprise anybody. People are increasingly being dispersed across work sites, and that changing workforce is expecting more flexible schedules. And I think that's why we have seen declines in carpooling, quite honestly, since its height in 1980 in this country, because people are working differently and working different schedules and need more flexibility. And that also brings about the introduction of more telecommuting. And that's really what we're all doing now, right? So my research on the growth of telecommuting is not going to reflect what's happening today, but what some of the industry statistics have told us from prior years. Our travel behavior, as I mentioned, is definitely changing. People are using a lot more online shopping, they're using shared mobility, they're using all forms of different ways of getting around. And that makes this more challenging for those of us working in this space to figure out how to really foster a community of people that are focused on reducing their vehicle miles traveled and their emissions through modes like carpooling and pooling overall, as well as telecommuting. It's also important to note that we've got an aging workforce and a desire to be really productive when we commute. And I know many of you know that there's been lots of discussions over the last, 5+ years about the role of automated vehicles in coming in to allow people to pay attention to their devices and to pay attention to other things. And those have been benefits of a lot of the transportation demand management strategies for a long time, with or without automation. Okay. More market trends. Whoops. There's a little bit of sensitivity when I move the
Susan, can we also get you to turn your webcam on too, if you don't mind? It looks like it got turned off there at some point. Thanks.
Okay, I'd be happy to do that. Okay, can you guys see
Gotcha.
me?
Thanks.
Yeah, I think you guys took control of my dashboard and it
Yeah.
was stuck. I couldn't do anything. Okay, all right, I'm back. Okay, some more market trends. So in some markets, park and ride lots are at full capacity, like places where I live, like the Bay Area, and that limits the ability to carpool. And we've also often seen that at BART stations even, and I know Scoop has done some great work with the Bay Area Rapid Transit District here in the Bay Area to help with that. And on-demand carpooling has the potential from a lot of the research to show a value proposition to travelers, but it's challenging to get people out of their own personal vehicles. The other thing that I think is important to note is the role of high occupancy vehicle lanes, which the history of those, right, is that they were created due to the Clean Air Act and from a regulatory perspective and to promote carpooling. But increasingly, they've been converted to express and managed lanes. And so there's a lot of uncertainty about how this is affecting carpooling. Some people would even suggest that it's reducing carpooling, but we need to better understand this overall. Okay, telecommuting. Okay, so this is what we're all doing today and probably for quite some time into the future. And I think we're all adjusting to this. And some of the data from the last decade or so should suggest dramatic increases that shouldn't surprise you, of as much as over 90 percentage points between 2007 and 2017. We've also seen data to suggest that US workers telecommuted much more, just between a time change of 2 years between 2015 and 2017, an increase of almost 1 million workers. And we also know that there's been about a 0.5 percentage point increase in terms of the US workforce working remotely. And those numbers are going up obviously quite dramatically. So now I want to turn my attention to the societal value of carpooling. And I'd like to say that I wish there was more research on this topic. It's often been a hard topic to fund. I've continually submitted proposals and had them rejected on this topic. And I'd love to see us change that and turn it around. But from the research I'm going to highlight today, there is a lot of evidence that there's great value in filling those empty seats in our own personal cars, right? There's the opportunity to reduce use of fuel, to provide cost savings, reduce emissions, provide enhanced mobility for a lot of people, time savings. Casual carpooling, for example, is a method that a lot of people use to save time. And it's a more convenient way of getting around for a lot of people because they don't have to find parking at work anymore. They can share those burdens. And it provides also an opportunity for social networking. But it does face a number of challenges. I've noted the issue of flexibility. There's also concerns about personal security and safety. And there's also concerns about, this could take me more time, and how is this going to affect my wait times? Waiting for somebody to come, and wait times actually in the vehicle itself due to route deviation of picking people up. A lot of research does suggest that this may be competing with public transit, including my own research on casual carpooling here in the Bay Area, which suggests that about 75% of casual carpoolers were taking public transit, either bus or rail. And then another aspect that makes the research a little complicated is trying to figure out what the induced demand effects are. So if you take cars off the road and you make it easier for people to move throughout a congested corridor, does that then bring more single occupant vehicles into the mix? There has been quite a bit of research in terms of gas savings that I want to share with you. In fact, one study showed that about 33 million gallons of gasoline could be saved daily in the United States if each average commuting vehicle carried one additional passenger. There's other research on casual carpooling in the Bay Area that suggests that reducing gas is a big benefit, and we could reduce up to 450,000 to almost 900,000 gallons of gasoline annually through casual carpooling. And most of those savings are attributed, by the way, to congestion mitigation. So this image is one I'm going to walk you through, and it talks a lot about what we've found from the research on the role of disincentives and incentives. And I think the most important thing that we've found is that drivers are really less willing to reduce their single occupant vehicle trips without some form of incentive. And so we've looked at a lot of the types of incentives that are used across the United States. So we did a pretty big census on this. And what you can see in the bulletized list is that there's a lot of common incentives like pre-tax commuter benefits, direct subsidies, guaranteed ride home, preferential parking, lotteries and drawings, gamification and rewards, including the use of gift cards, as well as monetary incentives. But when you look at this figure, you do see that this area of tax benefits, showing employer tax credits and overall and employee tax credits, tends to be a more uncommon incentive. So that's potentially a policy lever that we can all be looking for. But we do see these more common types of incentives, the subsidies themselves, as well as these non-monetary and monetary incentives, including access to preferential parking, for example, at the BART station or at the employment center itself, that have been effective over time. Changing the slides here, it's a little sensitive on my end. So I also told you that I would be treating this idea of incentives and gamification. And Metropia, who many of you may have heard of, is using just these types of platforms. And I have a screenshot of their image here of their app. And what they're doing is they're using real-time information to predict traffic flows. And they have algorithms that provide the travelers with information about their travel times on these congested corridors, as well as travel times on public transit and carpooling, along with information about how they can get incentives and even compete with friends and colleagues that may be on the same platform. And then another study that we've looked at is of Georgia's Cash for Commuters. And that study found that about 60% continued to carpool about 18 to 20 months after an initial incentive period of $3 per day for 90 days. So it looks like there's some degree of stickiness. And I think we should all be thinking a lot about this concept of stickiness as we look to the future. Post-COVID era. So challenges for carpooling research. So this is an area that makes these observations difficult to do and record. There's definitely challenges with determining whether or not people are carpooling, how many people are in the vehicle. A lot of people have talked about using technology to help us record how many people are in that vehicle itself, but this has been a bit elusive. It's also really costly to go out and study it in the field, going out and observing it. For example, we did a big study many years ago that focused on casual carpooling. It was, very labor intensive to go out and actually count people coming to the curbs, calculating their wait times. So There's also a lack of systematic analysis, so people evaluating impacts using similar methodologies and metrics. It's also really difficult to calculate induced demand effects. So the one thing that I think has also led to a bit of a challenge here is, what are we counting? Are we counting families or fan pools? Are we trying to calculate just commuting, or other types of trips to major destinations like sporting events? Are we talking about prearranged carpools that are in place for weeks or months? Or are we talking about something that's more real time, on demand? And as I've also mentioned, this phenomenon of casual carpooling. So there's all of these different categories that also makes it difficult to aggregate and understand how carpooling is affecting behaviors across the board. So with this slide, I want to wrap up with some emerging questions in light of the COVID-19 pandemic, and what impacts might we see in terms of longer term behavior. Are we going to see more stickiness in terms of telecommuting? I think we're going to see a lot more CommuteCon style conferences. I've already been getting a lot of notifications about that. Are we going to use the computers and telecommuting for telehealth, virtual happy hours? How are all of these things going to impact flexible work schedules? Are we going to be coming back to work in staggered schedules to make sure that we're reducing contact and for reinforcing social distancing? Where are we going to all really try hard to reduce unnecessary trips? And in many states across the nation, we're already being required to do so, but will that stick? And will there be a reduction in average vehicle occupancies? So going in the opposite direction of carpooling, because people are really concerned about social distancing as well as hygiene. So these are things that I think we really have to think about. Are things going up with respect to telecommuting, going down with respect to public transit use and all forms of pooling? And what interventions and technologies can we introduce to help with sanitizing vehicles, such as ultraviolet technologies? So behavioral change is hard to get at, but when you have an opportunity like we're facing, and I've argued in the past that crisis does offer us an opportunity, for looking at significant behavioral changes. So lots of work for us to think about as a community. So delighted to hear that 1,500 of our colleagues are here today. Shout out to members of my class, CE E256, who I encourage to attend today and listen in. And with that, I'd like to wrap up and field any questions that you have.
Thank you, Susan. So hi, everybody. I'm Matt. I'm going to be moderating our Q&As today. I've got a couple of questions that have come in through the question answer pane. So thank you, everybody, for asking questions. We've got time for maybe one or two of those so we can keep rolling. The first one of these comes from Grant Doughty, wanting to know if has there been any data yet on gas savings due to these events of the last few weeks? Have you heard anything about that yet? I know we're just starting to get some data around that.
Yeah. In fact, I was just exchanging with one of my mentors, the great Marty Wax from UCLA. We were exchanging messages on if anybody is out doing research on the larger financial implications of this reduction in gas use. And we're looking out for people that might be doing research on it. I haven't seen any studies of this yet, but I suspect we're going to be seeing a lot more economic indicators coming out about the implications for our financial system. And no doubt our air quality is improving as a result of this. This is quite evident to me in the Bay Area right now, but I haven't seen a lot of those numbers yet, but I think we'll be seeing some data shortly.
Forgot to unmute myself. We'll have one more question, and then we will need to move on. I do want to address, we've got a lot of folks asking about slide decks. We will be sharing slide decks afterwards as well. So if you missed something, we'll be posting those in a moment. So the last question comes from Hillary Norton. Hillary wants to know, what do you see as the role of congestion pricing and managed lanes pricing in terms of encouraging people to carpool.
Yeah. Hi, Hillary. So yeah, I think that this has been a mixed bag, as I indicated in some of my remarks, where we are converting some of these HOV lanes over, and what impact will that have, particularly as we create these system-wide networks like we're trying to do here in the Bay Area. And I think we need better technology to understand if this will point us in the direction of pooling as opposed to pointing us in the direction of more Lexus lanes, which brings in a lot of social equity questions. But I have seen research that suggests that this is actually causing us to reduce our carpooling behavior, because people can now buy their way into these managed lanes that were previously created through the Clean Air Act to promote behaviors like carpooling.
Excellent answer and excellent presentation. Thank you so much for joining us, Susan.